Hello, everybody. Greetings from Beijing in China. I'm here at Sibos, which is the annual meeting of SWIFT, the global interbank payment network, being held for the very first time here in Beijing. So I thought I'd give you some of my top of mind thoughts of what I thought the key themes were in this conference, and I welcome comments from you. So the first thing I want to say is that it's very interesting that the global SWIFT community is a little underrepresented here this year because many global banks and global consulting firms and IT companies have rules about their employees taking in laptops and phones into China. And so the numbers from especially the United States is a little lower than it could have been. But perhaps more importantly, is the fact that China even invited SWIFT to hold its annual meeting here in Beijing. China had been pushing back on making this invitation, and it finally did. But the week in which this conference is being held is an amazing week because there's a lot of things happening on the geopolitical front globally, and China somewhat relegated the importance of this meeting 2 levels down. So the highest ranking official to be present at this meeting or to address this meeting was not the governor of the central bank, but the deputy governor. He made that change very in the last minute, and that is telling in itself. The newspapers in China made almost no mention. There was a photograph in the China Daily, but almost no mention of the conference itself or how important it was. The Chinese institutions, however, are very well represented at this conference, especially SIPS, which is the Chinese payment network that is the equivalent of SWIFT, but for the Chinese renminbi. What we need to pay attention to also is that this exact week in Moscow, the BRICS member states are holding their annual conference, and they also made a number of important announcements relating to payment network. In fact, BRICS announced mBridge and BRICS Pay, and also announced the fact that the Bank for International Settlements is working with them to onboard the BRICS equivalent of a payment systems network. What is happening on that front really is that for many developing countries and for many countries in the South, the necessity or the need or the desire to find an alternative to a US-centric dollar payment system is very real. And it's real not because they are anti-American, but that the US system is becoming onerous. In fact, a number of the Chinese speakers at the conference were alluding to the fact that they were trying very hard to adhere to messaging standards and formats promulgated by US regulators for dollar transactions that go through the US banking system. And it has become onerous. And so the desire to find alternatives is very strong among the South, the countries in the South. And that wasn't really captured at this conference held by SWIFT because many of the moderators are Westerners and many of the speakers are Westerners. There is really an underrepresentation of people from the South who could bring on the agenda that the banking systems in the South are facing in terms of trying to become part of the global payments infrastructure. So we will see in the next few years this huge competition between SWIFT and alternative geopolitical payment systems, specifically SIPS, which is the Chinese platform, and then the new one, mBridge. And how they will evolve depends a lot on the incentive structures that the different payment networks will provide. A lot of what happens next month at the US elections will decide which of the discussions that have taken place at Sibos this year will get elevated to become global themes. Regardless of who wins the elections, several things are very clear. Firstly, the US is going to get into increased debt. Which means it will need to export that debt, digitize that debt, and make that debt attractive to the rest of the world. One of the interesting things about the banks in attendance at this year's Sibos is that many of them around the world, regardless of jurisdiction and countries, including Chinese banks, have declared incredible profitability just because the US interest rates were running at a high regime in the last 2 years. And that in turn has a knock-on effect in each of the different countries in terms of the net interest margins. Now, if the US continues to provide this kind of an incentive structure to the rest of the world, it continues to be able to call the shots and create a global payments infrastructure that it will dominate. And China will have to respond by providing incentives to make its own financial instruments and financial markets more interesting and more profitable. At this conference, I saw a number of Chinese infrastructure players who are inviting foreign participations into the Chinese interbank market, lending market, and of course the domestic bond market. So foreign participation is increasingly being encouraged, but that will need to be incentivized through better returns. So the real battle between China and the US is really a return on investment. And for that reason, I actually think that the US will embrace what I call the digitization of the dollar. And the digitization of the dollar will come not in the form of a US CBDC, but in the form of the US liberalizing the ability of banks to issue their own tokenized deposits and a greater role for stable coins, especially dollar-based stable coins going in the future. One of the downsides of attending a conference like Sibos is to listen to traditional bankers taking a pedestrian view of the future. They think they can ace it, they think that they understand it, and they think that it'll all work in their favor. So in the areas of AI, quantum computing, cryptocurrencies, there was nothing at this conference that demonstrated an understanding of how decentralized finance and traditional banking will eventually converge. What I thought I should have seen at this conference were as follows. Number one, in the area of core banking systems, for example, there was a lot of discussions on generative AI, which is really a productivity tool, and very little on the rise of domain systems that are AI centric. In the area of payments, interoperability is a very important theme. All parties today claim to be interoperable, but interoperability between fundamentally different geopolitical systems is very, very important. And multi-assets is also becoming a theme. My friends from Hong Kong told me that the difference between Hong Kong and many of the other jurisdictions where the regulators were putting in place new rules for digital assets, the transformations that are taking place, Hong Kong is potentially a winner simply because of the size of its capital markets. On the front of regulation, I think the BIS is setting itself up on a collision course between the different jurisdictions. Already, China takes a one-step remove approach to the BIS, although the current head of the BIS for Asia is Chinese, and we can actually expect him to impose a few Chinese agendas into the BIS, which will then be pushed back on by the Americans. And then also this week, we found that the BRICS group of nations announced that the BIS is working with them on mBridge. Now, all of these suggest that the BIS itself is setting itself up for a collision course. At this conference, there were a few conversations between the BIS, and the other regulator, the Financial Stability Board, and SWIFT, and I thought that some of those conversations were really very lame. So these are my points. Please give me your feedback. Write down, and I'm very happy to see agreements, disagreements, things that I've missed, and to take this understanding of the future of finance forward.